Representation in the 90s was one of those things where technically it's there, but I mean, don't joke yourself, it was never really there to begin with.
Oh no, it's a multiracial TV gang, including white guys.
A lot of tactics writers of the 90s took, especially for children's shows, was representation for representation's sake. Every demographic, i.e. potential consumer, had to be represented, resulting in these mega-teams of the white guy, the black guy, the Asian girl, the handy-capable guy, I don't know, Cyclops? And honestly, it was pretty rad, but not what people mean when they talk about representation in media. What's supposed to be the purpose of diverse casts was to allow for different voices to be heard. So much of the narrative in media at that time was specific to white American males living their nuclear family lifestyle, which is fine, but not indicative of the lives of literally the rest of Americans, much less the world. Like, I get that media are supposed to be a one-size-fits-all scenario for storytelling where anyone is able to enjoy it, but what makes the better stories more memorable are how specifically they nail certain details that you can relate to. What I'm saying is I'm tired of seeing Doug Funny walk inside his house with his shoes on, and I feel like even at 6 years old I was yearning for something that just looked more like me. The year is 1996. We're 1 year past Jackie Chan's first big American movie, Rumble in the Bronx, and 2 years past Asian powerhouse film, The Joy Luck Club. Slowly but surely, Hollywood was starting to diversify the stories allowed to be told on film for adult audiences. This is all to say that, as a 6-year-old Filipino-American, and regardless of what woke strides were being taken by the grown-ups, the current representative Asian media I vibed with were Rufio from Hook and whatever Ernie Reyes Jr.'s character was named in the second Ninja Turtles movie. I always forget because I'm too distracted by the fact that the turtles use toys more than their actual weapons to fight in that one. Come on, Raph, just stab them with the twin size already! While there were a handful of options out there, Asian representation was still so few and far between regardless of what age demographic you fell under. So when one showed up even for a second, Asian audiences were quick to notice it, even if everyone else didn't necessarily do the same. And at least in the case of the movies I mentioned so far, they've come to collect a small but loyal fanbase over time, cementing their place in history if only to those they matter to the most. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about any of those movies. Summer 1996, my major means of media consumption was through newspaper comics and Nickelodeon. So when I found out that the #1 children's programming network itself was going to release a full-length movie in theaters, I was pretty much prepared to watch it regardless of what it was. What came out was Harriet the Spy, a modern adaptation of the 1964 novel of the same name, depicting the titular girl character Harriet's exploits creeping through the city of New York and eventually having her comeuppance when her classmates narc on her. Awkward elevator pitch aside, it remains a solid movie about introverts and how they take in the world through observation alone. I mention this movie because with all the hidden gems of Asian representation in cinema, the one I never hear anyone talk about is the plot surrounding the Hong Fat family in Harriet the Spy, which is a shame since it served as my first major exposure to Asians in cinema, and specifically Asians presented in an unassuming nature while still maintaining their sense of culture. Around this time, Asians in television and cinema were presented with a certain sense of white wokeness about them, which I guess makes sense when considering the writing staff in the majority of American projects at the time were white dudes. This results in one of three outcomes. 1. The instance of a character that looks Asian but acts like every other character in the group, i.e. like a white male since that was the default value to attribute to anyone. 2. The tokenized route, where the Asian is written as a borderline stereotype, or the wildcard third option, where the media features no Asians at all, but is able to shoehorn a Bruce Lee reference into the plot because apparently even 2 decades after his death, we still couldn't let this king rest in peace. This is all to say that representations of Asians in American media at this time either had to have their Asians quote-unquote act white, act as Asian as possible, or be absent from the work entirely. There was no sense of subtlety or nuance that made you believe they were more than a mere cardboard cutout made solely for your enjoyment, so of course these attempts at diversity didn't work out. What makes Harriet the Spy so interesting is that the Asians represented are done so in as unbiased a way as possible. Throughout the movie, we see Harriet go through her typical spy route, which includes creeping on a variety of people, from shut-ins to pet hoarders to families running a restaurant. We are literally witnessing the diversity of the world framed through the eyes of a white person, and yet, Harriet acknowledges she's an outsider looking in. This is important. Rather than actively finding a means to other the people she spies on, Harriet simply takes in the world around her, blemishes and all. She doesn't aim to distill her observations into these palatable pieces of smug Eurocentric know-how. She just wants to take in anything and everything just as they're seen.
I want to see the whole world, and I want to write down everything!
She doesn't try to shoehorn her own personality into these other people's lifestyles, and instead appreciates them, knowing full well that she's an outsider looking in. She's the Anthony Bourdain to the Andrew Zimmern that is every other white person attempting to write minority characters. And it's in Harriet's childlike earnestness that the movie is able to frame her spying with a sense of open-mindedness, and her targets with a sense of empathy. As we follow Harriet along her spy route, each of her targets essentially lives out a mini-arc throughout the runtime of the movie, in an almost anthology-style collection of random bits of humanity in one big city. For the Hong Fats specifically, we're met with Frankie and his immigrant family as they run a family mart. In their introductory scene, Harriet states,
"The Hong Fats have a son, Frankie. He's cool, American style. His parents are Chinese style cool."
Frankie's story is essentially the go-to Asian American Lit 101 story of the Asian American bumping heads with their immigrant parents' sensibilities, but for the time it was a story I'd never seen told before, much less on a big screen by a Nickelodeon movie of all things. We only follow through with the Hong Fats 2 other times in the story, sprinkled intermittently into the main plot, and yet we're able to have a very concise arc unfold with the family. When we first see them, Frankie wishes to borrow his parents' company car for a date. The second time, we see that Frankie took the truck without permission and is berated by his family for crashing it.
Speak English!
Oh, okay. You wanted to speak English, huh? Well, you are Jack, huh?
Lastly, we're left with Frankie fixing the truck alongside his plot twist white girlfriend, so I guess the date went well. In the movie's hour and 40-minute runtime, the story with the Hong Fats totals at around 5 minutes, and yet it's something that's stuck in my brain for the last 20 plus years. Why is that? Well, for one, I tend to fixate on the media I absorbed during the formative years of my life, but also because their story itself was expressed in such a simple and honest manner. So many movies at the time had to really go out of the way to either make Asians as white as possible or as comically Asian as possible. So to have a simple story of this Asian family running a grocery store where you can see the grandpa meditate with his shirt off from the cash register was like this comfy middle ground of the two extremes at the time. We see the overly American and overly Asian styles clash in the backdrop of a city that's equal parts bustling yet mundane. Scenes like the Hong Fat's daughter as the bored cashier while her brother sulks with a broken arm behind her makes for this very unique slice of modern Americana that's groundbreaking even by today's standards. All this while our title character takes in and empathizes with his family's daily life. Harriet is like that non-mutual that likes every one of your tweets while silently saying relatable to herself, and honestly, that's all anyone can ask for. To have such a matter-of-fact attitude towards culture remains mind-blowing, and allows for a better means of accessibility over shining this huge spotlight and framing it as this foreign oddity. Such a mindset promotes a sense of understanding and openness that remains underrepresented in media even today. So, where does that leave us today? Modern movies like Crazy Rich Asians and The Farewell have done a fantastic job of creating not only opportunities for Asian actors in cinema, but opportunities for Asian writers to craft stories specific to their background and upbringing. We're slowly moving away from the stereotypes and even the textbook culture clash stories to delve further into what makes Asian cinema unique and worth sharing with other people. But with that comes this new problem, this sense of obligation. When Crazy Rich Asians first premiered, Viet Thanh Nguyen wrote a piece for the New York Times about narrative plenitude. In our modern movie climate, Asian movies written by and starring Asians is important not only for the people involved, but for the people consuming it. Asians put this unreal amount of expectations on media featuring them because watching it will open more opportunities for similar works to be created. Nguyen states, "For Asian Americans, if Crazy Rich Asians succeeds, we all do. If it fails, we all do. This is what it means to live in an economy of narrative scarcity. If and when we achieve an economy of narrative plenitude, a bad movie about Asian Americans will just be a bad movie. An excellent movie would be great, but a mediocre one would be no big deal. A mediocre movie about Asian Americans will not kill careers or be seen as a failure of and for Asian Americans, just as a mediocre movie by and about white people says nothing about white people." As fantastic as it is that we're celebrating diversity in this new age of Asians in cinema, we're also faced with the baggage of them being the only Asians in cinema, at least for American audiences. Like, name an Asian in a recent movie that wasn't either Constance Wu, Awkwafina, Ken Jeong, or Randall Park. We're putting all our chips on such a small handful of stars to push for diversity without really stopping to think how oxymoronic that sounds. Quality aside, these movies are seen as your wokeness homework, where you absolutely need to see them in order to support the cause, when the true endgame should be having to not care if any of these movies flop to begin with, and watching them simply because you feel like watching them. In the grand scheme of things, it's a good problem to have, but also, I really don't want to be guilted into dropping $30 to rent the live-action Mulan movie just because Disney is commodifying wokeness even during this modern apocalypse.